Well, good morning, first of all. I'm so glad to see everybody here. We had 3 services this morning. This is the 3rd service, and it's full. We would not have had room if we had only done 2 services this morning, and I thank God for that. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that if you've come to visit your grandmother and grandfather for Easter, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that they drug you here and made you come, or that you drugged them here. I'm not sure which way it went, but I'm glad that everybody's here. We're celebrating this morning Easter, and it is by far the single most important day in the life of a Christian. Because the Bible tells us that if Easter didn't take place, if the resurrection of Christ did not take place, that there's absolutely no need for us to be here this morning. There's no need for us to come to church on Wednesday nights and go to Bible study. There's no need for any of those things. It is simply without the resurrection of Jesus Christ, Christianity is nothing. And so we celebrate that this morning because we know that the resurrection was unstoppable, because there are a lot of things that tried to stop it. And we're gonna look at some of those things this morning, because there's a lot of things in life that are unstoppable. One of those things is time. No matter what you do, it just keeps on ticking. Every one of us have 24 hours in a day. We have so many days in our lifetime that we get to live out, and we're all taking steps every time we go somewhere. We're taking steps toward eternity, and it's not gonna. Time doesn't care who you are or what you do or how wonderful you are or how not wonderful you are. We all have time, and it will run out on us at some point in time, and we cannot stop it. Gravity, we cannot stop. I'm not sure if any of you have ever tripped and fallen, but if you've done that, you know that gravity wins almost every single time. If you've gained weight where you didn't want to gain weight, you know gravity wins every single time. It just keeps on happening. Then there's the march of technology. It just kind of keeps getting better and better and better. We can't stop it. What the phone that you have in your hand or on you right now, the computers that you're using at home, probably are already out of date. There's already something better that's being used out there. And they're coming up with stuff through AI and everything else all the time that is just constantly moving technology forward. Other things that are unstoppable are teenage drama. We know that for sure. That's always gonna happen. Pumpkin spice drinks in the fall are always gonna be unstoppable. They're just gonna be there. And there's always gonna be people who decorate way too early for Christmas. It's just gonna happen. Now, the other thing that was unstoppable, but they tried to stop it, was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And they tried to do it with lies. It tried to be done through doubts. Satan tried to do it with a stone in front of the grave. And death itself tried to stop the resurrection. And we're gonna look at every single one of those things this morning, because what I want us to understand this morning is that when we look at the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we have to understand all the lies, all the doubts, all the things that tried to stop it, so that we can better understand why we believe it. Because we believe it not because we've seen it. We believe it because it's been told to us. It has been passed down through the ages to us. And at some point in time, we made the decision to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ for our salvation, because that was critical for us. But it's not because of something that we have seen. It's because of the faith in our hearts, because we know those who have gone before us, they stood for something that they knew to be true. So what are some of the lies about the resurrection that are told out there? Well, one of the lies is this, is that the disciples stole the body. Now, this is important, because as we deal with all of these lies, what we have to understand is that the Roman authorities, the Jewish authorities, all of these different people had to make these lies up, because they knew that if Jesus did actually raise from the dead, that it changed everything. It changed political power. It changed financial power. It changed everything, religious power. It changed everything, and they had to lie about it. And we find this account in Matthew chapter 28, verses 11 through 15. It says this: while the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. Now, they're talking specifically about the resurrection. When the chief priest had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Now, here is why that lie fails. The disciples had absolutely no need to risk their lives for a lie. They were already scared to death. When Jesus got captured in the garden, he got put in this mock trial, he got beaten, and he got thrown on the cross. They scattered and they hid. And they were behind locked doors, and they could have stayed there, and they were wanting to stay there because really what they thought is they were next. If they were that that bold about the resurrection of Jesus before, they would have never hidden. They would have walked with Jesus and followed him to the trial. They would have been there as he had gotten beaten. They would have been there along with him the whole time. But the Bible teaches they scattered everywhere. They were scared to death. There's no reason for us to think that they would have given their lives up for something that they thought to be a lie, for something that they just kind of decided, hey, let's go steal Jesus' body and make it look like everything was true. They didn't do that. It's not at all. All of them were persecuted. And all of them except for John were killed for their faith in Jesus Christ and for teaching about the resurrection. And so that's just one of the lies that they tried to sell. Another lie that was told, has been told throughout the centuries, we still hear about it today, is called the swoon theory. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this, but it's the idea that Jesus didn't really die on the cross. It's the idea that he just kind of slipped either into a coma or he just passed out. Now, there's some reason that you could think that could happen. You have to think back to what he had gone through. When he had gotten arrested and then beaten, he was beaten before he had to carry his cross, he was beaten with 39 lashes with a cat of nine tails. This cat of nine tails is a whip that would have had 9 leather strings placed on the end of it. And within those leather bands was broken glass and rocks and all kinds of things. And he would have been whipped 39 times. And every time, somewhere between the bottom of the neck and the top of the calves, he would be hit 39 times, ripping the skin from his body, exposing his muscles, and just leaving him in a terrible, terrible state. The loss of blood would have been just extravagant. And then he had to carry a wooden cross, a wooden beam, through the city to Golgotha, where he was eventually crucified and hung on that cross. So it's very plausible that he was not in any condition to stay awake. It's very possible that he would have been in an ICU type of condition and fallen into a coma before he passed out and before he died. But let me say this. The Roman executioners knew what they were doing. And there was no way they were taking a man off the cross before he was dead. They had a job to do, just as we'll see in a little bit with the stone. They had a job to do, and failure to do their job would cost them their own life. They knew he was dead, and just to be sure he was dead, they took a spear and they stuck it in his side before they lowered him off of the cross. They knew what they were doing. If this were a lie, and if it were true, his body would have been in absolutely no condition to move the stone from in front of the tomb, and he would have had to do that. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Another one of the lies that was out there is that the women went to the wrong tomb. It's this idea that they didn't know where they were going. They were just trying to figure out where he was. They didn't know where he'd been taken. But we know that is not to be true. We know that Peter and John had visited the tomb. We know that they had seen where he laid. We know in Mark chapter 15, verse 47 said Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he had lain. He was laid in the tomb of a guy named Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea was a very rich, very politically powerful, financially powerful individual in those days. It was his tomb. It was a very specific tomb, and people knew that very specific location. And so they knew where they were going. This is a lie that was tried to be sold by those in authority. But the truth of the matter is, if they were wrong, if they had just gone to the wrong grave, then the people that were trying to prove that Jesus had not resurrected all they had to do was simply take them to the right grave and showed them where it was still sealed up and showed them that the tomb was still there. It just doesn't make any sense, but that's a lie that they tried to sell to them. One of the other lies is that the appearances of Jesus after the resurrection were hallucinations. And the problem with that is that hallucinations are individual events. You and I might both be having an hallucination at the same time, but the idea that we were having the same hallucination at the same time just is simply not existing. And we see Paul write about this in 1 Corinthians in chapter 15. He writes this, he says, "For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scripture, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that," now watch this, "he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep." And so he's talking about all of these appearances that Jesus made, numerous occasions, different places over a period of 40 days to multiple people at the same time. So these are not hallucinations. These are people who had the ability to touch Jesus, to see him, to break bread with him. And they have noticed who he was. These are eyewitness testimonies that transformed the disciples and their way of thinking. It brought them out of their locked rooms and out of hiding and put them into the public eye so that they could preach about something, they could teach about something that could very well get them killed, and eventually did. And when you look at the early explosion of the church of Christ, the one that he created, you have to understand that the resurrection is a central focal point in that. Now, that's some of the lies that were cast about the resurrection that tried to stop the resurrection from being a thing. But there were other things that weren't lies. It was just the doubt within the people that were there. There's one story about the two men after the death of Jesus and after the resurrection. These two men are walking on a road to Emmaus. And they're having a conversation about what had taken place over the course of the weekend and all the things that they had seen and they had witnessed. And it says that Jesus came up walking next to them, and they didn't recognize him at first. And Jesus asked them, what are you talking about? And these men said, oh, haven't you heard? And this is what they write in verses 19 through 21 of Luke 24. It says, Jesus of Nazareth was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priest and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death. And they crucified him. But watch this phrase. But we had hoped. There's their doubt. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. See, in their mind, what they were waiting for was the Messiah that was going to come and put the nation of Israel back in power. That's what they've been expecting. This is what they've been taught their whole time. So that when the Messiah comes, God's nation, God's people will be put back in power. We're going to put Rome down. We're going to put all these other people down. And Israel will be back in power right where they're supposed to be. But that's not what happened. This Messiah got hung on a cross and died in a humiliating, excruciating death, shameful death. And to them, the cross looked like failure. And so they had hoped that he was the one, but he wasn't the one, according to them. And then Jesus just spent time talking with them and eventually sat down with them and ate with them. And at some point during that conversation, Jesus revealed himself to them. And their eyes were open and they recognized who they'd been with the whole time. And their only response was to go back to the disciples and say, it is true. The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. One of the other doubts that we see is that when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and she found it empty, she didn't say, he's risen. That wasn't her first response. Her first response was, they've taken him. He's not in his tomb. She immediately thought theft. She immediately thought that the Roman people had done something wrong with Jesus' body. And we don't know where they put him. And so her first assumption is that somebody stole the body, and her grief kept her from being able to see the hope that Jesus had promised. It's a bad situation, but it was there. Then you see Thomas. This is what Thomas is known for. Thomas walked with Jesus in his ministry. He did all the different things that everybody else did. We have all these great stories about Peter and James and John and all these different things that they did. What do we know Thomas for? For one thing, his ability to doubt the situation. How would you like that? Everybody else is known for how fast they ran to the empty tomb. Others are known for what they did with miracles and all these different. Thomas is known for doubting. We even have a phrase called "Don't be a doubting Thomas" that we still use today. And Thomas is known for this and famous for it. John chapter 20 verse 25, where it's written, "So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe.'" Thomas needed proof because he doubted. And he got that opportunity a week later when Jesus stood in a room with him and told him to touch his hands and his wounds and to believe. And Thomas did just that. And in verse 28 of that same chapter, Thomas's only response is to look at Jesus and say, "My Lord and my God." And then in Matthew 28, when Jesus is about to ascend into heaven, and he's called all of them to the mountaintop, and he told them to meet them there, and they do, what we see is this situation where it says that some worshiped and some doubted. Now, this, in my opinion, has got to be the most relatable situation for all of us in this room, because we connect with them, because it's this moment where our doubts coexist with our faith. I don't know when you were saved. For some of you, you were in elementary school and with the little kiddos in here that were just here. First of all, was that not the sweetest thing to see that little boy up there worshiping with them? I think every week we just need to have the kids come in here and worship with us, and then when I start speaking, they need to go, because they won't stay and listen. But I don't know when you gave your life to Christ. I really don't. But at some point, you said in your heart, I believe in the resurrection. You had it. You got it. And then you began to grow up and you began to do life, and there's these moments, if we're honest with each other, that we realize we have to put away logic in order to believe the resurrection. We don't see people getting resurrected. When we went and placed my mom in the ground a year and a half ago, we didn't sit around and wait for her to come back. We didn't expect it. We don't see it. And so for us to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there's a part of us that has to put away a little bit of logic. And sometimes, even though we know we believe and we believe in God and we can look around at the majesty of his creation and see everything that there is, there are moments in our life where we go, resurrection's kind of hard to believe, huh? It's tough. There's parts of that that are very difficult. The resurrection wasn't believed because it was easy. It was believed because they had actual encounters with the risen Jesus that overcame their doubts. We believe because we know these individuals way back then gave their lives for something that was not a lie, that they believed so wholeheartedly that it determined the rest of their lives. Every single one of them gave their lives up, eventually preaching the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it overcame their doubts. And so every once in a while, we have to have these moments where our doubts are overcome by the majesty, the glory of God, and just the known fact that these people witnessed something that we didn't get the opportunity to witness, but we believe it. We know it to be true. And sometimes it coexists with our faith, but we know it to be true. There's another way that the resurrection was tried to be stopped. And it's by putting this stone over the entrance to this tomb. Now, the stone was absolutely massive. We see in Matthew chapter 27, verse 60, it's described as a large stone. Now, most scholars will tell you that this was a large round stone. If you've ever visited Israel, you will have seen that it was probably, you've seen the round stones that are in a groove in front of the grave, and it would have been rolled there by several men, because most scholars believe that this stone would have been between 1 and 2 tons. And if you don't know what a ton is, it's 2,000 pounds. So this stone weighed anywhere between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds, depending upon the stone that was there at that particular time. Now, this matters because we said earlier, when we were talking about this swoon theory, that Jesus would have been in absolutely no condition to move this thing by himself. There's no way that he could have gotten up in the condition that he was in, with his body beaten and as badly broken as it was, and gotten up from a coma or just have fallen asleep with the blood loss that he had and his body shred to pieces, and gotten up and from inside with no leverage been able to move that stone. There's no way physically he could have done that on his own without the power of God. Another reason we know this to not be true is because the women in Mark chapter 16, verse 3, when they were going to anoint Jesus, their main concern was, who will roll the stone away for us? There was just so many doubts about what that was going to do. And so the stone was huge. It was massive, and there was just no way that somebody was going to be able to move it by themselves. But going further, a little step further, the stone was sealed. We see this in Matthew chapter 27, verse 66. And it says, so they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Now, let's talk about this seal for a second. This seal would have had the mark of Roman authority on it. So breaking it wasn't just vandalism. It would have been an act against Rome itself. And so to do that, you are declaring some type of an aggression against Rome, which would have cost you your life, no doubt. To break it and have the guard that was guarding it, we're not talking about one individual. We're talking about a group of men who have been given the assignment specifically to make sure that this guy doesn't come out of this grave, that nobody comes and tries to steal this guy out of his grave so that they can make the rumors up and do all these things. They were given a task. They were trained specifically for these types of things, and they knew that if they failed in their task, that it could cost them their own lives. So this tomb was sealed, and it was guarded by these men who were told, it will cost you your own life if you let anything happen to that. And the idea that the disciples or anyone else could have snuck by these men without being seen, unsealed a 2,000 to 4,000 pound stone, rolled it out of the way, again, without being seen or heard because they were asleep, and taken the body of Jesus that had been just completely torn apart without making marks of blood and a trail of blood along the way because of it, just doesn't hold up. It was incredibly unlikely. So the question is asked, why is the stone important when talking about the unstoppable resurrection of Jesus? And it's because the stone represented the finality of death, the immovable and the impossible. The resurrection required overcoming every physical obstacle, including this last one that we'll talk about, and that's death. You have to know that in the first century Judean and Greco-Roman world, the idea of somebody's body rising from the dead was absolutely absurd to anyone, from pagans to Jewish philosophers to religious leaders. It was just absolutely not an idea that would carry any weight at all. To them, death was final, it was universal, and it was absolute. There is no question about it. In that time, death was considered irreversible. There's nothing that could be done. And so for them, once someone died in the spirit, if you were Jewish, they believed that your spirit went and was permanently separated from the body, and as Jewish people, your body went to the realm of the dead. And it stayed there until God came back to redeem his people. And it was a group event. It was not a solo event. It was a group event where everybody was going to come and be risen together at one time, and it was just the promised people. That was their idea. For the Greek people, they believed that the spirit left the body. They believed that the spirit was good, but they believed that the body was basically trash. It was weak. It was worthless. There was nothing good about it. And so when your spirit left the body, it was not returning to this weak vessel, this poor vessel that was there. And then on top of that, religious people of that time believed, because it was taught in the Torah, certainly for the Jewish people, but also the Greek people believed this as well, that in Deuteronomy 21, verse 23, it says, anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. For them, the crucifixion meant that someone was cursed and rejected by God. So when Jesus crawled up on a tree and was crucified, it was as if the whole religious community was looking at him going, well, God is not with that person. He may have had a good ministry while it lasted, and he may have done some really cool things, but God put him on a tree. He is cursed. He's not with God anymore. And so they did not believe that to be Jesus to be the Messiah. And so if the bodily resurrection was possible, it would have been a complete contradiction to everything that the Jewish people believed and the pagan people believed and the Greek people believed. It would have been complete contradiction to all of those things. In addition to that, those people had never seen anything like this before. They believed in miracles and they believed in resuscitations, like Lazarus, because most people at that time did not believe that Jesus raised Lazarus back up from the dead. They believed that Lazarus was probably swoon theory, that he had fallen asleep, that he had fallen into a coma because of his sickness, and he had been there for 4 days. If you'll remember in the story, Jesus comes after 4 days of Lazarus being in the tomb, and he says, open the tomb. And everybody's like, what are you doing? It's gonna smell, it's gonna be disgusting. And Jesus said, open the tomb. And Lazarus comes walking out. They believed this to be a miracle, but they believed it to be a resuscitation. And more than that, anytime they had seen this in their history, the person that had been resuscitated eventually died again. Jesus didn't die again. Jesus is bodily resurrected. He is in perfect form, and the scars of the nails in his feet and his hands and the spear in his side, those are all still there. But Jesus didn't die again. They had not seen this before. When people say something like this, they say, well, ancient people would have believed anything. Not this. This went against everything that they thought, everything that they comprehended. They would have had to shatter every thought they ever had concerning death in order for the bodily resurrection of Jesus to be true. And yet, the truth of the resurrection was unstoppable. It was unstoppable by the lies. It was unstoppable by the doubts. It was unstoppable by the stone that was placed in front of his tomb. And it was unstoppable by death. Let me read this to you. The power of the resurrection is the same power that seated Jesus at the right hand of God in heaven and gave him the name that is above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every name that is invoked in the present age and in the age to come. It is the same power that placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be head over everything for the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. Here's the thing this morning. We are here celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ, not because we've seen it, but because we know the lies and the doubts and everything else don't hold water. We believe it because men gave their lives for something that was the absolute truth. They wouldn't have given their lives for something that wasn't true. We know that. We have faith because God's word shows us about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And you might be in here this morning because your grandma made you come, and you may be thinking, well, JG, that's the Bible, and I don't believe the Bible. Well, let me tell you this. You might not believe the Bible, but you will find other historical documents that document the life of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So if it's just this Bible that you have a problem with, go study it somewhere else, and you'll still find it to be true. My prayer this morning is that when you celebrate Easter, today and every year from this day forward, that you will have no doubts about what happened on that day, and that he is risen, and because of that, we have peace with God through his son, Jesus Christ. His righteousness has been placed on us. When God looks at you, when he looks at me because of our relationship with him through Jesus Christ, he doesn't see the imperfections that we see when we look in the mirror. He doesn't see the things that we've done wrong and all the things that we try to hide from everybody else. He sees us through the filter of Jesus Christ, the righteousness of Jesus Christ, and he sees you and he sees me as perfect, just the way he created us. Because Jesus took all of those things to the cross, killed them there, took them to the tomb and buried them there, and he left them there. And they are no longer for us. Look, if you're going through life right now and you say, look, I've never had that moment where I've taken this knowledge of Jesus Christ and moved it to my heart, because that's what happens for us as Christians, is that knowledge becomes our faith, and it comes from our heart. Because that's what Romans chapter 10, verses 9 through 10 tells us, that those who believe in their heart and confess with their mouth, this is what happens. Our faith becomes so strong that we can't help but confess it. We can't help but confess it. It says at that moment that we're saved, that we're placed in the hand of God, and that we're sealed with the promised Holy Spirit, and nothing can snatch us away. And we go through life, and life is hard. We lose people. We go through financial issues. We just go through life, and life is difficult. But even in the difficulty of those circumstances, we still have peace, because we know that eternity lies ahead of us, and we know where we'll be. But there's people in this church maybe this morning, and there's people in this community that you'll interact with, they have absolutely no peace. And they're trying to find peace in every single way they possibly can. But nobody's introduced them to Jesus. No one's told them about the resurrection. And that's where you come in. My prayer this morning is that this isn't just a celebration of Easter for you here this morning. This is a celebration of Easter for you here this morning, and a movement to go out from here and to tell people about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because of the power it has in your life, and the power it has in mine, and the power it can have in theirs. But they got to hear about it. Amen? Father, we love you, and we thank you for what you have done for us through your son, Jesus Christ. We're thankful that he beat death. We're thankful that the stone was rolled away. We thank you that the lies don't measure